On a Thursday afternoon, House Speaker Mike Johnson and Senate Leader John Thune released a unified joint statement. They announced a path forward to fully fund the government and end the legislative standoff. But there was a glaring problem with this display of unity. Less than a week earlier, on a private conference call with House Republicans, Speaker Johnson forcefully opposed this exact same legislative package. He told his members it was a, quote, crap sandwich. While Republican leadership debated the quality of the sandwich, the Department of Homeland Security was actively shut down. The party in power was paralyzed, fighting itself over how to fund border enforcement and national security operations. To understand how the Speaker of the House was boxed into this humiliating reversal, we have to map out a wildly unpredictable 72 hours. A window where private promises, speakerphone calls with the president, and public trashing on cable news broke the typical chain of command. The timeline starts at 2:41 a.m. on Friday. After working through the night, the Senate unanimously backed a deal to fund most of the agency, leaving only the sharpest disagreements for a future reconciliation bill. Senate Majority Leader John Thune operates under a strict 60-vote threshold. In a chamber divided this thinly, almost any legislation requires a bipartisan coalition to move forward. Believing the hardest part was over, Thune sent a text message to Speaker Johnson overnight, outlining the agreement. He told reporters he was cautiously optimistic the president would support it and they could get the funding across the finish line. But Thune miscalculated the divide between the two chambers. A legislative compromise engineered to survive the Senate's 60-vote reality often acts as a political death warrant in the House. By later that same morning, the action shifted to Mike Johnson's territory, where the rules of survival are entirely different. The Speaker controls a paper-thin majority. He cannot rely on broad bipartisan coalitions without risking his leadership position, meaning a handful of conservative defections can sink any bill he brings to the floor. Adding to that pressure, the conservative House Freedom Caucus holds a persistent structural threat over his head: the motion to vacate. This procedural rule allows a tiny minority of members to trigger a sudden vote to fire the Speaker at almost any time. These hardliners rejected the Senate's staggered funding approach. They demanded a single comprehensive DHS bill that protected funding for immigration and customs enforcement, explicitly tied to new voter ID and citizenship proof requirements. Facing a revolt from his right flank, Johnson made a desperation play during a Friday morning GOP leadership meeting. He called Donald Trump and put the former president on speakerphone. Johnson told Trump his conference could not pass the Senate's compromise. Instead, the Speaker successfully pitched Trump on a clean 8-week stopgap measure, officially walking away from the bipartisan Senate agreement. The persistent threat of losing his gavel functionally strips the Speaker of his ability to negotiate long-term deals. He is forced to govern by managing the immediate demands of his most extreme members. But by Friday afternoon, Johnson's new strategy fell apart. In a phone interview with Fox News, Trump publicly trashed the Senate bill, saying it was inappropriate and failed to adequately fund ICE. The Senate was caught off guard. House leadership had abruptly cut off all communication, opting to text Thune rather than call to explain they were abandoning the deal. Predictably, Johnson's short-term stopgap went nowhere. Democrats had already repeatedly rejected it, and without their votes or full Republican unity, the House measure stalled exactly as the Senate had warned. Days later, when it became obvious the House plan had failed to break the shutdown, Trump completely reversed course. He urged Republicans to fund ICE and border security through a future budget reconciliation process, effectively demanding they return to the exact Senate framework he had killed days prior. Carefully constructed legislative strategies carry zero weight when a single external actor can bypass the chain of command and rewrite the party's platform overnight. Within hours of Trump's reversal, Johnson yielded. He released that joint statement with Thune, publicly backing the exact legislative framework he had aggressively lobbied against just days before. Back in the House, members who had followed the Speaker's initial charge were furious. Representative John Rose bluntly told leadership they had boxed themselves in by publicly attacking the Senate package. Representative Derek Van Orden was even sharper, calling the sudden shift completely unacceptable and an abomination. Representative Laurel Lee demanded to know how Republicans could turn around with a straight face and support a position that was completely ideologically inconsistent with everything they had argued the week prior. The Department of Homeland Security shutdown was ultimately resolved, but the erratic process severely depleted the Speaker's credibility with the very lawmakers he needs to maintain control of the House. Senator Thune's initial compromise ultimately prevailed as the legislative solution, but the messy public breakdown left both leaders politically damaged. They are trapped in conflicting realities. The Senate demands measured 60-vote compromises to function, while the House requires absolute loyalty to narrow, highly partisan demands just to keep the Speaker in power. And hovering above both chambers is a powerful, highly unpredictable external veto. In this environment, following today's marching orders can easily become tomorrow's liability.